As Ireland's oldest city, Waterford's history is richly decorated with colourful characters and dramatic stories. For a millennium, Reginald's Tower has stood at the very centre of this history. It has housed criminals, hosted kings, and borne witness to struggles, sieges, and celebrations. The story of the tower is the story of Waterford itself. That story begins over 1,000 years ago, when the ground beneath our feet was glimpsed from the bow of a Viking longship. In 914, a Norwegian sea pirate named Ragnall, or Reginald, sailed up the river shore with a great fleet of ships. Although the Vikings had been raiding the Irish coast for over 100 years, this voyage was different. Reginald was looking for more than gold, livestock and slaves. He was looking for a home. And on the raised ground between the shore and St. John's River, he found it. With a natural harbour and water on two sides, the site was difficult to attack and ideal for mooring ships. Reginald and his men built a wooden Viking fort by the water's edge and named the site Vedrarfjord, an Old Norse place name meaning winter port. They established a triangular settlement above the harbour, protected by an earthen ditch and bank. By 1050, Vedrarfjord occupied a 6-hectare site, an area that is still known today as the Viking Triangle. Inside the settlement, houses and streets were laid out in organised patterns. As trade flourished, more Vikings settled in Waterford. They married the native Irish, integrated, and the city prospered. As it grew, the fort remained the focal point of the settlement. The native Irish referred to it as Dundori, after Dune or Fort of Oak. In time, it would come to be known as Reginald's Tower, after its founder Ragnall or Reginald. It was a name that would echo through history for over 1,000 years. By the 1130s, Waterford's earth bank was replaced with a stone wall. These new defences were put to the test when Waterford was placed under siege by Anglo-Norman mercenaries led by Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare, otherwise known as Strongbow. In 1170, Diarmaid MacMurrough, the King of Leinster, asked Strongbow for help defeating his enemies. In exchange, he offered him not only power, but also his daughter Aoife's hand in marriage. And so, heavily armed, he crossed the Channel and launched an assault on the city. At first, its defences held. Then Strongbow's army found a weak spot, tore down the wall, and rushed into the town, slaughtering citizens in heaps along the streets. The citizens retreated and made their last stand at Reginald's Tower. But they were soon beaten and driven from the city. The men and women of Waterford did not give up so easily, though, and 4 years later, mounted a revenge attack. This time, the Anglo-Norman forces were beaten back to the tower, but with the help of reinforcements, eventually retook the city. In 1171, Henry II sailed to Waterford. It was the first visit of an English monarch to Ireland. While here, Henry imprisoned one of his knights in Reginald's Tower, establishing the first royal prison in the country. When Henry's son John became Lord of Ireland, he rebuilt the tower as a solid stone structure with deep foundations and 2 floors. He also strengthened the city walls and fortifications. As the 12th century gave way to the 13th, Waterford prospered. King John returned a second time and established a mint in the tower. As with the prison before it, the tower reflected the fortunes of the town. John's son, Henry III, later gave permission for the building of a nearby Franciscan friary and Dominican priory. His son, Edward I, also used the tower as a prison, particularly for those who defrauded the mint. The penalty for this crime was to have your hand chopped off. In the 14th century, Waterford's fortunes took a dark turn. It suffered an economic downturn, and in 1348, the Black Death struck, killing almost a third of the city's population. At the end of the century, the tower was turned into a munitions store when King Richard II brought the first cannon into Ireland. By the 15th century, the city's economy had recovered. The mint was re-established in the tower, and 2 further floors were added to accommodate larger cannon. They would soon be pressed into action. In 1495, Waterford became the first Irish city ever to be placed under artillery siege. Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the English throne, sailed to Waterford and began a terrible bombardment. Cannon fire was exchanged between the tower and the invading fleet until Warbeck changed tactics and decided to starve the city instead. But the men of Waterford had other ideas and drew up a plan to trap the invaders. They built a dam upstream, reducing the water level in the small harbour. As the water disappeared around their ships, Warbeck's army leapt down to attack, but when they did, the dam was broken, flooding the area and drowning the men. Those who swam to high ground were captured and beheaded that evening in the market square, their heads put on spikes as a deterrent to others. As a reward, King Henry VII gave the city a new charter and motto: Urbs intacta manet Waterfordia, meaning the city of Waterford remains untaken. It is still in use to this day. By the end of the Middle Ages, artillery was improving and additional structures were needed to accommodate larger guns. Fearing a Spanish invasion, Queen Elizabeth gave orders for a blockhouse to be added to the tower, housing several large cannon. Despite its impressive structure, in 1570 a band of pirates led by Thomas Stuckley, allegedly the Queen's half-brother, stole 7 of these cannon. In 1580, additional forts were built to defend the city. A watermill was also constructed beside the tower, indicating that the area was no longer used as a harbour. Despite, or perhaps because of the fortifications, Waterford enjoyed relative peace in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. This was shattered, however, in the winter of 1649 with the arrival of the infamous English Republican general Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell landed in Ireland with his new model army, and in 1649, marching south, he attacked Waterford. The general placed the city under siege and sent letters demanding the townspeople surrender. They refused and vowed to resist. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Cromwell's army began suffering from dysentery, and he was forced to admit defeat and retreat. Waterford was the only city in Ireland to successfully resist Cromwell, the great military genius of the 17th century. However, the victory was short-lived. The following summer, Henry Ireton, Cromwell's son-in-law, returned and with heavy artillery took the city. A relic of that fight still exists in the tower today. High on the north-facing wall, a cannonball from Ireton's cannon is lodged deep in the stone, a potent reminder of those turbulent years of warfare. In comparison with its predecessor, the 18th century was a time of peace and prosperity in the city. While the tower was still in use as a military storehouse, the surrounding town walls were deemed redundant as defences. Gradually, they were torn down. The old harbour was drained and made into a bowling green, and by 1737, the entire area was laid out as the Mall. In the 19th century, Waterford City Council turned the tower into a prison. Newspaper reports of the time condemned its utter bareness, discomfort and stench. That did not deter the female prisoners, however, who reportedly indulged in jigs, reels and country dances to while away the tedious hours. The upper tower was nicknamed the Ballroom as a result. Later, the tower was used as the residency of the High Constable, and in 1954, it was turned into a museum. The story of Ireland's oldest city is made up of many characters, events and objects. Yet through the centuries, nothing has played a larger role in history than the tower itself. Whether as Reginald's Fort, Dundorey or Reginald's Tower, it has reflected the changing fortunes of the city and its people. In times of battle, a place of sanctuary and strength. In times of peace, a symbol of wealth and celebration. In 1843, a famous son of Waterford, Thomas Francis Maher, described the tower as a massive hinge of stone connecting the two great outspread wings of the city. Waterford's history rests on this hinge of stone. Once viewed as a gateway to Ireland, the tower now stands as an extraordinary gateway to the city's rich past.